Alright, I'd like to talk about the mid game, or at least transition to talking about things in the mid game, because, that's where the real spice starts. That's when it gets. I mean, don't get me wrong, laning is interesting, there's so much going on, but, mid game is laning times holy shit. So I'd like to get there, but first we need to cap off the laning stage. So let's talk about the end of the laning stage. The laning stage is basically when everyone's a little baby hero, and they're level 1 and they're very weak, and they can't do much, so their creeps tank damage for them, while they try to hit other creeps and poke each other, get experience, get gold, buy items, get stronger, and eventually become, big boy heroes and actually be able to do things. That's pretty much the laning stages. It's especially so with carry heroes, the pause 1 traditionally, because they're really weak early game but very strong late game, whereas heroes like supports and offlaners tend to be stronger in the early game but don't scale as well. So first, I want to talk about some ways that the laning stage won't necessarily end. We've talked about power spikes, and Dota is basically a game of power spikes where you hit one power spike, and then something happens, and then maybe there's another power spike and something else happens. So let's take Slardar here, who we visited when we were talking about mid and trading with right clicks. Slardar's level 6 power spike, when he gets ult, allows him to reduce an enemy's armor by 10 seconds on a 5-second CD, by 10 seconds, sorry, by 10 armor on a 5-second CD, which doesn't stack because that'd be insane, but using it before it ends refreshes the duration. Slardar also does a bunch of physical damage through his right clicks and has a couple stuns in his kit. So he basically reduces your DR and actually gives you negative DR early game, because having more than 10 armor is, I would say, kind of rare when Slardar is level 6, but I guess it depends on what hero you're playing, because I'm sure there's some agi heroes that would have more than 10. But basically, he enables himself to do a shit ton of damage and stun you throughout that, and he has gap close. So when Slardar hits level 6, if you aren't awesome or have a really great support, you're probably kicked out of lane as a carry who is traditionally weaker in the early game. Let's take Spectre, who is like the epitome of late game powerhouse, because she has this ability here, Dispersion, that gives her 22% DR at max level, which if you compare to, say, Tidehunter, who has Kraken Shell, which gives him damage block. At max level, this ability blocks 50 damage per physical attack that he takes. So every time you right-click him, he blocks 50 damage, which in the early game is awesome, because when he has this maxed out at, say, level 11, because you're probably maxing out Anchor Smash, then Kraken Shell, I would think. At level 11, he blocks 50 damage every time you right-click him. That's kind of crazy. When Spectre has hers maxed out, that's only 22%. So 50 versus 22%, you would have to do 250 damage per right click for Dispersion to be as good as that damage block. Dispersion also applies to magical damage, but we're not going to use that for the comparison. Dispersion's a way better ability, especially in the late game, so if you're doing less than 250 damage, Tidehunter's damage block from Kraken Shell is just far better than Dispersion, especially the lower damage you do. Like, if you're just hitting for a measly 150, he's taking out a 30 damage, whereas Dispersion only blocks 22%. It's a big difference. In the late game, though, when everyone's pimped out with items, everyone hits like a truck. So in the late game, if you right click for like 600, 700 damage, sometimes more if you have crit built in. Like if you have something that enables you to crit, maybe you're hitting for 1500 sometimes. Dispersion blocks a fuck ton of damage and reflects it. That's insane. So in the late game, dispersion is nuts, which is one of the big reasons why Spectre scales so well, because in the late game, when everyone's pimped out with items and everyone's strong as fuck, she's just stronger, because if you have the same, you're not going to have the same six items, but if you have the same kind of items that Spectre has, she's just going to be better than you, because, well, if you're this Tidehunter, you block 50 damage per hit, good for you. She blocks 22% and reflects it right back at you. So Spectre, I just wanted to take this time to say that Spectre's really good late game, and she's balanced out by being a wet noodle in the early game, for the most part. So if you're playing Spectre, and you're laning against a Slardar, and that Slardar hits level 6, you're basically kicked out of lane, because he's going to beat the ever-loving shit out of you anytime he gets the chance. And you're either going to be harassed down to 0 and have to go back to base, or he's going to straight up kill you several times, over and over, until either you leave, or you rotate a bunch of heroes to that lane, or you force him to leave by rotating a bunch of heroes to another lane and putting pressure there, which is a way to end the laning stage. But what I want to say is that kicking Spectre out of lane as Slardar when you hit level 6 does not necessarily end the laning stage. It just makes Spectre's life very hard, because Spectre can do a really shitty job farming the jungle, or maybe she'll swap lanes with her offlaner, take that lane against your carry, who maybe isn't as scary as the Slardar at his level 6 power spike, and her offlaner is going to lane against you and try to just keep up and farm. Or maybe it's not a Spectre, maybe it's a Wraith King, who jungles very well because he can spawn a bunch of skeletons that help him kill creeps really fast. So maybe you're laning against a Wraith King, and you kick him out of lane, but he's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna go jungle now, see you later, Slardar. So, sure, he's not quote-unquote laning anymore, but the laning stage didn't end, because for the rest of the heroes on the map, you didn't actually change all that much. So kicking a hero out of lane, or being kicked out of lane, or even just as the Wraith King, if you hit level 7 and you're maxing out your Mortal Strike to spawn a bunch of skeletons, and you decide, okay, I don't care about this offlaner, I'm gonna go jungle now. My support can have the lane, and just get a bunch of golden XP and safely kill creeps, and protect our tower, as is your responsibility in lane, which we mentioned in the last video. That's awesome for Wraith King. He gets to go farm really fucking fast. His support gets a lot more farm than they otherwise did. And laning continues. Laning carries on. So just getting kicked out of lane or leaving lane does not in and of itself end the laning stage necessarily.